gentlemen, welcome to America's Auto Enthusiast Program. This is Auto World. And now, here's your host, Bob Long.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here for another hour of Auto World. And in this hour, we're going to be joined by the man who joins us every week at this very same time. It's the guy who has all the knowledge there is, more than 25 years worth of lubrication experience, a certified lubrication specialist, a former member of the U.S. Navy with lots of experience in nuclear submarine propulsion and much, much more. He's also one of the largest distributors of Amsoil in the entire U.S. of A., all across the USA and Canada. So we are going to have our good friend on, Dan Watson. He's standing by. And again, I'll remind you, you can call in anytime throughout the hour at 855-660-4261, 855-660-4261, or via the email bob@autoworldradio.com or bob@boblongradio.com. I'll give you two for me, and I'll give you one for Dan. Dan Watson at thelubepage.com. Dan Watson at thelubepage.com. And we welcome Dan Watson back to the program. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing good this evening, Bob. You doing fine yourself?
Yep, doing fine. Thanks very much for asking. And you've got an interesting question here right off the bat.
I'm kind of shifting a little and asking you some questions because I've kind of discovered that there's this huge wealth of, as you said, automobile geek knowledge, but I call it just thorough understanding of the entire industry, and it's kind of fun to pick your brain with a question now and then. So I wanted to ask you this, and then I'll list mine, but, you know, in your opinion, what are the three most significant innovations in automobile technology since the Model A Ford? Okay, kind of a big rambling question, and I'm sure there's more than three things to look at, but just something to think about for a minute, because I know you keep up with it, but it is amazing how much over this, call it 100 years of automobile history, how far this industry's come with the products it produces now compared to what it produced in, say, 1905. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm going to lay my three on you, and then we'll see what the man with all the automobile knowledge has to say. For me, I would say the three greatest innovations that I think of are, one, the automatic transmission, okay?
Sure.
And two, I would have to say the fuel injection management system. Okay, in other words, we went from the carbureted systems to the fuel injection systems. And then third, which is a little odd for me because I don't really think that much of them, but I'd have to say third to me would be the hybrid technology that is the recent significant innovation. Now, I'll give you an out on this, Bob. If you want to think about it, you can think about it and promise to answer it in whichever segment you choose, or if you kind of got it aligned in your mind, you can just run it right out at it.
All right. Well, why don't I try just running what's on the top of my mind? When you think of automotive innovations in the last 100-plus years or so, I think, Dan, you've nailed some really significant ones, but if you go back to early technology, I mean, the electric starter certainly was one of the big innovations of its day. As you said, the automatic transmission, headlights, other things that I think of more recently about all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. That certainly is one of the big innovations. We see more and more vehicles these days being produced with all-wheel drive, including a lot of cars and crossovers and SUVs. I'd have to put that on the list. I'd have to put the seatbelt, which really got its start by in the late 50s by Volvo, the Swedish car company, which today is still a Swedish car company, but is actually owned by a Chinese firm, but they still have all their Swedish engineers in place. And let's see, what else? I would say maybe anti-lock brake disc technology, which today we take for granted to be standard equipment on every car, but back years ago it was a high-priced option on just a handful of cars, and we've seen that technology go down to the level where you won't find a car that doesn't have it. So there's 3 right off the top of my head, Dan.
Well, and you mentioned the starter, right? The electric starter.
Yep.
Now, I know people are going to say he can't be that old, but when I was a boy and we owned a small orange grove here in south central Florida, down towards LaBelle, Florida, we had new orange grove planted, new trees, and we had a water truck. And it was an old cut-down Model A frame with a water tank on the back, and you drive down the rows and water these new sets of orange trees, and they were just small trees. And you had to hand crank start it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, that thing scared the devil out of me every time, because I was just about 10, 12 years old. My brother was older, and he was driving, and I'd be riding along, and that thing, when you would go to turn it over and start it, if it kicked back on you, it could throw me. I wasn't very big. If it kicked back on me, it could literally lift me up and throw me back across the front. So the electric starter, that's a high level of priority as far as I'm concerned. That thing scared me every time I tried to start it by hand.
What a great story.
So I'm aware of that, and you nailed it, because I can't imagine, if you didn't have electric starters, there'd be very few women driving cars.
That's true.
Because that thing is dangerous enough, and the bigger the engine, that was just a little 4-cylinder Model A engine. Can you imagine trying to use a hand crank to start a 6-liter V8?
Yes.
You'd need Arnold Schwarzenegger to have to come over and help you get her started, So
that's right.
But yeah, these innovations have been tremendous, and I looked at the automatic transmission because today, now when I was a boy, automatic transmission was still an option. You could get a manual transmission in almost anything that you bought. But I don't think you can even get a manual transmission in 90% of the cars that are produced today.
No, you're absolutely right, including, a lot of very expensive sports cars, which used to be synonymous with stick shifts. For example, Ferrari no longer sells any vehicle here or any place else in the world without a automated manual gearbox. It's actually a manual gearbox that has an automatic clutch is probably the best way to describe it. But it's true, the take rate on even these high-end vehicles that are real sporting models. Porsche, for example, their king of the road car for most of the last 50 years or so has been the 911 Turbo, and that used to be something that only was available with the manual gearbox. That's the only way you could get it, and now you can't get it any other way except by getting it with what they have got, their very fancy automated manual called the PDK transmission. A couple of different folks have tried to save the third pedal. Car and Driver magazine has had a campaign for that for the last 10 years or so, quietly raising awareness of the fact that people are not buying the manuals of the few vehicles that are out there, and they better do so if they want to see it around. And I'll give kudos to the Haggerty Insurance folks who do some workshops across the country where they get teenagers out and teach them how to drive a manual transmission, something that is unheard of, but something that hopefully will get automakers thinking about maybe producing a few more manuals. But great topic, great question, Dan. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the middle of Corvette Boulevard and Stingray Avenue, this is Auto World with your host, Bob Long.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for being here. We've got Dan Watson, as we do each and every week at this very same time. He is the CEO of thelubepage.com. Dan at the Lube Page. Dan Watson at thelubepage.com is his email address, and we're anxious to get those questions sent over to him and also sent to me at Bob at autoworldradio.com, or you can call up, say hello to Mackenzie, who's our board operator in Master Control at our studio in just outside of Minnesota, and you can, just outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, I should say. Telephone-wise, you can call in at 855-660-4261. And Dan, that was a really great way to start the hour. We could definitely revisit that topic again, I think, in the not-too-distant future, because there have been so
much interesting stuff to talk about in that category of innovations and their impact, and how like you were talking about the manual transmissions. Listen, I taught both of my daughters how to drive in a Nissan pickup with a manual 5-speed transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason was, as I said, that if you don't learn this now, somewhere down the road, the only thing you'll have available to you for some reason is a manual shift car, because you got to get somewhere or something, and you'll be at a loss. You'll have no ability to do it. So if you're going to drive, you need to know how to do manual transmission. So both girls, their husbands, neither one knew how to drive a stick shift.
Wow.
I mean, you're talking about changing environment in automobiles. Can you imagine that, Bob? We would have said when we were young, maybe, hey, watch it. If you let your girlfriend drive your stick shift, she's going to grind the gears, right?
Exactly.
Now we come forward 50 years, and all of a sudden we got daughters with husbands that have never driven a stick shift.
I know, that is so true. And another thing that they say today, one way to guarantee not having your car stolen is to drive a stick shift, because most thieves don't know how to drive a stick shift either.
I didn't think about that. That's a good ace in the hole, Bob. That's a good comment. Well, okay, we will. Maybe next week we'll talk about that topic again, just as we can have some more fun with it. Absolutely.
Meanwhile, we got a question here from let's see, a question out of Texas to start this hour off question-wise. And the question is, it's from Phil. You seem to favor running synthetic oil for longer drain intervals. If any petroleum meets the API's specs, why can't you just change it every 3,000 miles and not pay the higher price for synthetic oil? That's a question from Phil in Texas. And Dan?
Hey, and I'd say to Phil, go for it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no requirement that you got to go to synthetic oil. Now, here's the thing, though, Phil, and I say this because every synthetic oil doesn't allow you to go for longer drain intervals, but if you were going to run Amsoil Signature Series oil, and you were a high-mileage guy, meaning you're a salesman or something, you're putting some miles on that car, or you're a teenager, you're doing miles with the car, that'd be probably just as many. But anyway, and you're going to change that oil every 3,000 miles. Let's see. Well, if you bought the premium synthetic from Amsoil and you ran it for we'll use 24,000 miles because it's easy to divide that by 3, right?
Yeah.
So you would have changed your oil 8 times. 8 times in the time that you would change it 1 time with the synthetic. Now, some people, I had a guy one time told me that it gave him great satisfaction to change oil. He loved changing oil. Well, if that's you, and you're a do-it-yourselfer, and you just love the idea of changing oil, I always like to change my own oil in the past because it made me feel like I was doing the right thing for the car, but I don't think I could get into it for 8 times compared to 1. That would be just like maybe I was obsessive or something with changing oil. So the point here is all kidding aside, Phil, you can change your oil every 3,000 miles. But I submit to you that 90% of people will never do that, even if they claim that they're not going to buy the better oil to go the longer drain intervals. This National Lubrication Magazine in the survey shows that people go an average of 4,400 miles on petroleum oil that they said they were going to change it at 3,000. The sticker on the window tells them to change it at 3,000, and they average 4,400 miles. They're overranging this product and may, I'm not saying are, but may be sometimes causing some excessive wear from their oil having lost its primary lubricating ability. So this is not rocket science. This is just, if you're going to stick religiously with 3,000 miles and you buy a quality petroleum oil, I think you'll do fine. But that's up to you if you want to change that many times. Now, the other part about it is, though, quite frankly, you can get into extreme conditions that petroleum oil just can't deal with. You can get in very hot summer conditions, West Texas, Arizona, South Florida, southern Mississippi, something like this. You can get in a location where your car starts to overheat. Well, if you've got a high-grade synthetic, a real true synthetic, it could care less. You're not going to get it hot enough to ever cause a loss of lubrication. But with some of these cheaper petroleum oils, they're just not able to take that higher temperature, so you don't have any protection there. You're going to have some probably excessive wear during that overheating period. Same thing on the cold weather side. You can do the best you can with a quality petroleum, say it's a 0w-20. Well, the truth is, even though it can pass that 0w rating, it doesn't respond at all like a pure synthetic in cold weather. So it may be that you really have some trouble getting good lubrication while your engine's warming up if you're using a petroleum oil in northern Minnesota. Okay, so there are reasons where you want to use the better protection, period. You want better protection. It's like in the winter, Bob, when a person finally decides they live in northern Minnesota and they better put on the snow tires, okay? It's no longer good to be driving around with the regular tires. Would the regular tires get the job done? Yeah, but they won't get the job done too well when you get enough snow and ice. You'll be sliding all over the place and find yourself getting a tow truck to get you out of the ditch. So we have to anticipate sometimes the severe conditions and protect for that, and then we'll naturally be covered for the easy conditions. So, but again, if you change your oil over 3,000 miles with a good quality petroleum, I think you can drive your car for 300,000-400,000 miles. Now I say a good petroleum because, folks, it's just another topic I don't even want to get into. There's so much bad stuff out there, so much inferior oil. It's just, I am not happy with the status of the lubrication industry right now and some of the stuff that's out there being sold. So just be careful and do your, what we call due diligence. Check it out. Anything you buy, go on the internet, find out all the information you can on it before you're satisfied that that product is suitable for your car.
Excellent words of advice. When we come back on the other side, Tom in Atlanta's got a question. We also have Ed in Florida, and we have room for you at 855-660-4261. Or Bob at AutoWorldRadio.com. Dan Watson at thelubepage.com. Get your questions in. Dan Watson at thelubepage.com. Bob at AutoWorldRadio.com. That's the name of the show. This is Auto World. I'm Bob, along with Dan. Don't go away.
And now, back to the show with the highest octane, Auto World, and your host, Bob Long.
Dan Watson is with us from thelubepage.com, which means we've got one of the very best experts in all the world with us when it comes to lubrication, when it comes to talking about all kinds of topics on a whole wide variety of different entities. If you want to talk about outboard motors, if you want to talk about professional gardening equipment, farm equipment, if you want to talk about snowmobile lubrication, we're up for anything. So give us a call or shoot us an email. Dan, we got a question from Tom in Atlanta, where he lives in that neck of the woods, and he says it gets really hot in the summer. My car calls for using a 0w-20 engine oil. Should I use a heavier oil in the heat? A good question, and something to be concerned about.
Yeah, I think the nickname Hotlanta.
Yes, that's right.
It's very appropriate, especially in July and August. I mean, it gets hot. So here's the thing. the 0W-20, if you buy a true synthetic, and folks, I'm using that term true because, again, that's another topic we've talked about on this show before about some of the bad imposters out there. But let's say, for example, if you use Amsoil Signature Series 0W-20, you don't have to worry about the hot temperature. Because let me explain these numbers again. It's always important to understand that those numbers that we're talking about, 0W-20. The first number, the 0W, just consider the W stands for winter. It's a good way to look at it. So that oil has a certain rating for winter use, meaning with a 0W, it will pump very fast in cold weather. It moves very quickly. It's not restricted by cold weather. Now, the 20 on the other end is the viscosity rating that's measured at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. We call that the operational viscosity. Now, a 0W-20 and a 5W-20 and a straight 20 would all have the same operational viscosity number. It's only the winter rating that we're changing there, 0W, 5W, or no winter rating, straight SAE 20. Now, the cars that are designed today that have 20 weight oil for their use, they should be protected well by that 20 weight oil, but I will make this exception. I do not think it's appropriate to try to run a 5W-20 in a Ford V10 engine that is designed and goes into commercial vehicles and big RVs. I just think that that's asking for trouble. And those engines would do fine on a 30 weight oil. Okay, most any of these 20 weight rated engines would do fine on a 30 weight oil, but I don't advise you to go against your manufacturer's recommendations unless you're moving into extreme operating conditions. But I do advise you, if you're going to use a 20 weight oil, do some research, check it out, get a high quality synthetic 0W-20. If you get a poor synthetic, or what I call an imposter synthetic, or a blend, you are asking for trouble in the 0W-20 rating. You will not, your car won't stop on the side of the road, but you will have a continued excessive wear going on that will eventually cause your ring seat to get bad, and you'll start to have blow-by and lose compression in the engine. So you have to think long-term when it comes to this. So again, if you used Amsoil synthetics for 0W-20, you're going to be fine. But even in that circumstance, if I had a big V10 or a V8 and I had it in a heavy operating condition, my opinion is you would be better off with a 5W-30 in that severe operating condition. I think that pretty much sums it up, Bob.
I think that's an excellent answer, and we thank the gentleman for writing us. We've also got Ed in Florida with a question, and he wants you to explain two-cycle mixing ratios. Why are they different for so many different applications?
Hey, Ed, you don't feel bad. You must be, in my time of doing this, I've had this question, what do those mixing ratios really mean, at least 200 or 300 times. So it's always good to ask the question, because you're asking something that probably, if there's out in our listening audience, there's at least another 100 people that go, yeah, what do those things mean? So don't be embarrassed to ask the question. Here's the thing. If you can think of it in this simple aspect, it's 100 to 1, 50 to 1. These are the numbers we're talking about. 40 to 1, 80 to 1. Well, what does that really mean? And what it means is the fuel to the amount of oil. So, for example, a 100 to 1 would mean if I had 100 gallons of fuel, I would have 1 gallon of lubricating oil mixed into that 100 gallons, and that would be a 100 to 1 mix ratio. Now, if I had 50 to 1, it would say that if I had 50 gallons of gasoline, I would have 1 gallon of oil. That would be a 50-to-1 ratio. Okay, and then if I go on down to a 40-to-1, I'd have 40 gallons of gasoline and 1 gallon of oil. Now, you can move that ratio into other things than gallons, okay? If I have it in quarts, and I have 100-to-1, well, I would have a mixture. If it was in quarts and it was 100-to-1, I would have 100 quarts of gasoline to 1 quart of oil. As you know, that'd be about 25 gallons of gasoline to 1 quart of oil, okay? Because 100 quarts, 4 gallons in a quart, would be about 25 gallons, okay? So that's how you do those ratios. Now, why are there so many different ratios? And it's because the manufacturer is trying to find a mix ratio that will protect the moving parts of that two-stroke engine, because this is for two-stroke application. In a two-stroke application, remember, we don't have an oiling system like in a four-stroke car or something where you have a filter and you have an oil pump and all that. We don't have any of that. So we mix oil in the gas so that when the gasoline is brought into the cylinder, it brings oil with it, and that oil is slung into the cylinder and coats everything to protect and prevent those rings and moving parts from having wear. It's actually a very difficult lubricating regime because in the four-stroke world, when we get too much fuel contamination in the crankcase, we condemn the oil and drain it out. Here I have a case where I'm going to mix my oil in the gasoline, which is, how can I do that? How would that work? Well, it's different designed oil that is designed to be mixed into the gasoline. Now, some of the later and greater, just incredible two-stroke engines being made by people like Evinrude E-Tech and Mercury Optimax and stuff, they no longer even mix the oil into the gasoline. The oil is brought in with the air instead of the gasoline. The gasoline is injected in right at the last second, but the oil comes in with the air. So now all of a sudden you've got to have a type of oil that can distribute itself well in moving air without the aid of gasoline lowering its viscosity and mixing it. It's got to do it by itself. So that's a whole different thing, which means that the old idea of using these very, very heavy, loaded up petroleum oils to protect these engines is just completely restricted. You can't do it.
Hey, it's Billy F. Gibbons from ZZ Top, and you're listening right here to Auto World.
Dan Watson, CEO of TheLubePage.com, joins us live here on the broadcast, and we've still got a bunch of questions here we're going to see if we can get through, including one out of KROE land in Wyoming. That's the next one up. We'll get to that, but want to make sure that everybody has got Dan's personal number, because you got to visit the Lube page. There's no question about that, and you can check out all the videos that he's done on YouTube. But Dan is such a great resource of information and has no problem with a personal call from you. So, Dan, why don't you give out your telephone number for everybody?
It's 800-370-2986.
800-370-2986, and just give Dan, a day or so. He gets a lot of calls in an average day, but I can guarantee you one thing: Dan will call you back, which I can't say is true for most experts like Dan. Never make themselves available at the level in which Dan does. So hats off to Dan for all the great work that he does. Our next question is from Sheridan, Wyoming. I have seen Amsoil at the Sturgis rally and didn't give it much thought. One of my buddies from Arizona swears that Amsoil makes the best bike run cooler in the Arizona heat. Is it just him imagining, or is this true?
Well, it's true. and it's not some kind of unexplained mystery that this takes place. When you look for how you're going to lubricate something and whether it's going to cool it or not, this is what we call an oil air-cooled motor. In other words, there's no radiator, there's no water jacket. So this engine has to dissipate the heat that's picked up in the oil and through fins on the heads of the engine. It's a V-twin. And it has, sometimes they'll even put an oil cooler, separate oil cooler on the engine. But that's all because the oil is collecting the heat, okay? And that oil removes that heat as it lubricates and flows down through the passages and then goes to the oil sump and then back up. So it's taking out the heat, and then the heat gets taken out of the oil by the air stream going over the oil cooler and the places where the oil can be cooled in portions of the engine. So why would synthetic oil do better here? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is when you're in an air-cooled situation, you're going to run higher oil temperatures. Now, I want the oil to stay liquid, number one, in all cases, because if the oil becomes somewhat of a mixture of vapor and oil in some places because it's so hot, then it doesn't transfer its heat out as fast, meaning that oil that is not 100% liquid, when it flows through a hot area, will not remove as much heat as oil that is 100% liquid. Liquid removes heat faster than vapor, okay? So that's the first thing. You don't want your oil having hot spots where it goes to vapor instead of maintaining its liquid form. The second part is a little bit down in the weeds, so let me explain it quickly the best I can. Anything that you deal with in the heat transfer world has a specific coefficient of heat transfer, okay? And what that means is how well does that product transfer heat? We all know that if I were to take a piece of wood and it got really hot and it's burning on one end, it's burning on one end. I can pick up the other end because it doesn't transfer the heat up the wood. It may be warm, but it certainly won't be hot. Now imagine if I have a piece of steel and I lay one end of it in the fire and you try to pick that other end up with your bare hand. It's going to burn you. What that means is that steel has a high coefficient of heat transfer. It moves heat through it quickly, whereas the wood does not. Well, how is that possible? What makes that happen, and why does that happen? It's really easy to understand. When you understand that temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the molecules in the substance that you're dealing with. Oh, sounds real complicated, right?
Yeah.
Imagine heat causes those molecules to vibrate really hard. That's kinetic energy. They vibrate against each other. So if they're close packed, dense, and they're close to each other, that vibration transfers really easily. But if they're widely spaced, like in air or foam or a piece of wood, they don't have close aboard contact, so they can't vibrate into each other and transfer the heat. Synthetic oil, because if it's the right synthetic oil, it's made with a uniform molecular structure, meaning imagine in your mind millions of tiny little golf balls, okay? Well, if I got these golf balls side by side, if I hit one on the left side, it will cause each one in between all the way to the right side to feel the same impact going across. Well, consider the one side is where the heat is, so it makes the golf ball on that side get excited and it rattles real hard. Well, it transfers it right across that layer of golf balls to the other side. That's called convection heat transfer. I'm sorry, it's not convection, it's conductive heat transfer. So I'm doing good. I'm moving this stuff out quickly. Now, in petroleum oil, because the molecules are all such different sizes, they don't have that nice little uniform molecular structure, and so they won't transfer heat because they're not touching each other and vibrating quickly to move the heat out. You got big ones and small ones and so forth, so it's kind of a less efficient heat transfer across that oil film. Okay? Now, we've played Mr. Science about all I think that the people can stand, but that's the truth. I mean, this stuff is not that hard to understand. Heat transfer is moving energy from one molecule to the next. If I have close-packed molecules, it moves real easy, especially if they're the same size. Okay, that's efficient transfer. If they're not close-packed and they're big and small different ones, it will not transfer as readily across that barrier. That's why we have stuff called insulation, where it doesn't transfer at all, okay? And so that's kind of like, lube school we're doing here, but to answer the question, yes, your bike will run cooler. Some people report with Amsoil 30 degrees cooler.
Wow.
In hot conditions. So where a bike might be trying to get up to 270 degrees, you might hold it down to 240, 220. It really makes a difference because when those bikes get too hot, Bob, they start losing compression. They won't hold their compression, they'll shut off. So let's see if we can get another one in.
All right, we got Steve in California. He thought he heard someone say 0w-16 oil is required for new Hondas. Is this true?
Yes, I was hoping to get to this question because 0w-16 has been used in Japan. It's coming into the United States. Unfortunately, like I've been just beating the dead horse about this, the quality of some of the oils we're making over here are not equal to the same quality standards they're making them in Japan. This 0w-16, some of these cars is having trouble, folks. They're having some unexpected wear and different problems that are going back to the Honda dealerships, and they're trying to deal with it. Here's what I would suggest to you. Think about running a 0w-20, because if you run a 0w-20, at least in the interim, until we can be sure that all the kinks are worked out with having high-quality 0w-16. Amsoil makes a 0w-16. You could run that one. But in general, if you can't get to the Amsoil 0w-16, you might find a mobile 0w-16. That might be a good one to use. But be careful of using anything else, because that oil has to be of the highest quality to provide protection. If you go up to a 0w-20, you think you're going to get in trouble with Honda? Not really, okay, because those same engines were running 0w-20 before. So if you use the 0w-20, at least in the interim, over the next year or so, you'll probably avoid some problems with some inferior 0w-16 that's trying to come into the marketplace. And it'll settle out, and we'll know who's got good 0w-16 and who doesn't, because it's not going to go away. But in the interim, I think you might save yourself some grief if you just buy a high-quality 0w-20 synthetic and just go about your business.
And Amsoil has a product for that, Dan?
We have a 0w-16 in our OE line. I kind of prefer the 0w-20 Signature Series as my choice. But the 0w-16 made by Amsoil will give you protection, or they would not make it, okay?
Well, it's definitely a good question, and lots of people should take your advice, Dan, and go for a little bit of a buffer and move up to a 0w-20 oil. If there's problems lurking out there on the horizon, it's better to protect your investment with great products from Amsoil. And as usual, the hour just flies every time you're with us, Dan. Give out your telephone number for us one more time and email address.
It is 800-370-2986. Email Dan Watson at thelubepage.com.
Thank you, Dan.